The first thing I want to say is there's no reason to take any photos of slides because the last slide will be a QR code, and I promise it's legit, where you can download the slides.
Not malware at all.
No, and also that's exactly what would we say if it was. So, anyway, there was a weird echo, by the way. Yeah. All right. Anyway, first a little bit about us.
I've been asking this question for a long time.
Yeah. All right. And anybody here who has black pets, you know the problem. First of all, you can't take a photo of them because there's so no one can see how damn cute they are. And also, if you manage to take a photo, no one can see how damn cute they are, and they just think that that your head has a weird shape. But that's actually not the case.
Little voids.
I live in Copenhagen with these two rascals and my wife also. I've been around 20 years in security, and I've been a little bit of both, internal, external advisor. And then 3 years ago, I went freelance, trying to do whatever fun thing is around there. Yep, and I've always had a thing for games and fun to learn security. So I jumped at this position, as this possibility to mix cybersecurity with Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm here to convince you to do the same. So that's great.
I totally blame Klaus for this image, but I do in fact
and
also
AI.
have four and AI. Right?
Yeah.
But I do in fact have 4 cats that look something like those. We're the crazy cat family, I guess. I live in Utah with my wife and 2 children and 4 cats. So it's always an adventure. I have been in the IT and security space on about 20 years as well, depending on how much misspent youth you want to count in that. And we'll be talking about some of that misspent youth here as it relates to this too. So I am a recovering CISO, virtual CISO, I guess. I've just recently gone to Delete Me. But prior to that, I had worked for a company called Cyber Risk Opportunities and have done a lot of things, worn a lot of hats, caused a lot of consternation, you know.
Yeah, and now you're a sales guy.
Yeah. And there was the opportunity to kind of marry my incident response experience with my Dungeons and Dragons experience. So here we are.
Yeah, and also, if we didn't say so, I'm Klaus, this is Glen. I think we missed that.
Details.
Yeah, anyway, this is the agenda for today. We'll be talking about the problem we see with more traditional training. And we'll talk about how your brain is wired for game and social learning. And also how role-playing games fits into that. And then we'll talk about HackBack, which is a sort of a security training framework, you could say. And it's training that doesn't suck, so that's good. All right. Well, the first thing we want to talk about is that what game-based learning is and what gamification is, because they are two completely different things. Game-based learning is using the game as an actual way to learn, whereas gamification is adding game elements to motivate. For instance, the first person who does the security, the boring security awareness training gets cake. I'm from Denmark, so we do everything in cake. That's gamification, and that's not what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about game-based learning. And yeah. All right. So what's the problem with training? Well, the traditional...
Just kind of sum it up.
So yeah, the traditional approach to training is like there's class-based, there's computer-based training, and theoretically and intellectually those are So the problem with those two is that they're theoretical, they're very intellectual. They don't fit any or all learning styles.
Often more passive in nature rather than active.
Yeah, and specifically for instance response training, we have tabletops. And in theory, though, they should be better. It's a practical approach, but really, they're often really boring. And the problem with that is when they're boring, people don't engage. They don't join unless they're forced to. That's how it works, not because they need to. And obviously, that's a huge problem because people are there like physically, but if they don't engage, if they keep thinking about that they shouldn't be honest because their boss is in the room and they keep fighting the scenario, all those things you usually see, then it's really not.
And
really
one
not,
of the common themes I hear too is that somebody just went down a checklist of questions in the exercise, and is that really very valuable? Probably not. So.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk a little bit more about tabletops in general. First of all, this is our experience of tabletops. Yours may differ, but the whole point about tabletops is to build a muscle memory on incident handling, and eventually it'll be better incident handling when everyone knows their role, even half asleep, and also it's a cost-effective way to train teams.
How many people have been in an incident without having done any training or tabletop exercises before? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
How well do you make decisions when you're in that situation? Yeah, me too.
Yeah, or another question.
You know.
Yeah, or another question: who was in tabletops, and supposedly did training, but when they were in incident, it didn't work. It didn't give them anything. Yeah, exactly. But the problem with how we do it, as I said before, before we start talking about it, this is based on our experience. You could theoretically have done something else. But obviously, from the last 20 years of observing tabletop exercises, this is what we've learned. Pardon?
There's a lot of room for improvement.
Yes, there is. So generally speaking, participants don't open up. They protect their own turf. They're not really that honest. There's egos clashing. I don't really want to help that person over there because I really hate them.
I don't like that person. They squashed my other initiative over here the other day.
People fighting the scenario. There's always that person in the room saying you can't do that.
That's impossible. That would never happen. Our EDR would have caught that. Like,
Yep.
You know.
So and also they are what rated and scripted? Yeah.
You wrote and scripted, and that's what I mentioned earlier, where you have somebody that maybe hasn't done the thing, hasn't lived through the thing, talking about their checklist of questions that they go through, and it's sterile, and no discussion really comes out of it. There's no identification of gaps, no challenging of assumptions. It's just the checkbox exercise that gives you the value of a checkbox exercise.
Yeah. But the most important thing here is there is really no focus on engaging participants. A couple of years ago, I talked to some folks that were arranging the Lock Shield exercise. That's a NATO cybersecurity exercise, and asked them what they did to engage their players, and they literally looked at me as I was from the moon, because that had absolutely not crossed their mind, and obviously that's a huge problem. So
why would we want to engage the participants?
Yeah, exactly. And also another thing is that there's also, depending on your company culture, there is this perception of fun. That fun, if you're having fun, you're not being serious. And obviously that's totally wrong, because if you're having fun, then you're engaged. And if you're engaged, you're honest, and then we actually have a tabletop that makes sense.
How many pen testing types in here learned the skill because it was fun? Right? We learn better. We learn better that way. It's the opposite of taboo, or at least it should be.
Yeah. So obviously, the big question is there another way? Fun, you should ask. So let's talk about that and also how it works. Yeah. Yeah. So it turns out that talking about Dungeons and Dragons and convincing people to do that, to use that just because it's fun, is a really bad argument. So we turned to science and to build some authority, and unfortunately, science backs us up on this. So I've assembled a couple of quotes. Most studies in the sample reported analog GPL as an effective pedagogical tool with an impact on the learning, cognitive, and psychological levels. There's a quote from Frontiers in Psychology. So basically saying game-based learning is a good way to learn. So that's one thing.
In things that we knew but needed support for.
Yeah, exactly. And it turns out that your brain is wired for learning with others, and this is my favorite quote. I think we're all impressed by how stupid humans are. It reaches almost epic proportions. We're stupid in dozens and dozens of ways, but human minds are plug-and-play devices. They're not meant to be used alone. They're meant to be used in networks. Games allows us to do that. They allow us to use our collective intelligence because collectively, we're not so stupid, depending on the size of the crowd, of course. But that's a different story.
Any folks in the various CTFs here that feel like they do better with a small team? There's a reason.
So Bobby, this is from an article summing up a panel debate at Stanford. So luckily, also science also back us up here. But you know, why role-playing games? And it turns out that there are people out there studying role-playing games and specializing in Dungeons and Dragons, and I love that.
Enter my childhood.
Yeah. When Dungeons and Dragons and its cousin are played in an inviting, encouraging, compassionate, and intellectually engaged environment, play opens the door to truly amazing possibilities for learning. So this is the article quoting David Simpkins, a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And all that's good, but honestly, as I said, that's not really why we do it. We do this because we're geeks. And,
Dang right.
Yep. And we'll take any excuse to use Dungeons and Dragons in our grown-up jobs. And let's be honest, you probably want that too. So why else would you be here, right? Yes.
Well, so role-playing is immersive. You really get into it when you start to have a good time, when you get to play a character, when you get to do something that's a little bit outside your normal self, right?
So there's a reason why Dungeons and Dragons is successful, because players laugh. They laugh a lot, and that's a very big difference compared to a normal tabletop.
I got to just play a little bit out there a couple hours ago, and everybody immediately gets into it. It's you find things to laugh about, and that opens you up. That opens people up in a way that they maybe wouldn't be otherwise. And I think you've all seen this, but this is actually saying it and observing it in a more professional setting, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So when players are immersed, they forget their egos, they forget to protect their turf, they forget to fight the scenario, and they're more honest in general.
I want to touch on the honesty thing in general, because how many of you may have been in a meeting or an exercise or anything like that where you just said, man, it's not worth speaking up. It's not worth saying this thing. Maybe my idea is dumb. Maybe my boss is in the room. Maybe I don't want to look dumb. Maybe I don't want to look too smart. A lot of reasons that we might kind of self-censor in that way. And when you start laughing and you start getting into a role, you forget about that stuff.
Yeah, and there's also the unexpected bonus that are really things you can only do with Dungeons and Dragons or any other role-playing games, because there's something like empathy. But by empathy, I mean that when we're playing role-playing games, no one says that you have to play the role that you would do in real life. What if you play something else and learn how that works? My favorite example is if you're a very technical person, then you tend to believe that that's the only thing that matters in an incident. But if you take a person like that and put them in the role of head of communication, then all of a sudden they get this epiphany that, oh my God, this is also really, really hard and also extremely important.
Somebody else has this job, and I've never thought about it this way, from this angle, from this lens.
No, exactly. And also it's more lifelike in the sense that the way we play, we play is that each player has a set of actions. That means that once those actions are gone, then they can't do anymore. And that's extremely lifelike, given that one person can't do everything. Or they don't have the bandwidth, and also, what if that person gets run over by a bus?
You run into those key people in your normal tabletop exercises that are the ones that do everything, or are the go-to people for everything. And just like a real incident in a real scenario, they can't do everything. There's a team. There are other people that have skills, and if you're limited by time, I guess this lets us put a structure in place that that can much more realistically, I guess, simulate what a real incident might be like with some of those time boundaries, or those knowledge boundaries, or some of the actions that we can actually take.
Yeah, and then another really important part is storytelling. Storytelling is what makes people understand what's going on. And obviously, doing an incident, you want people to feel it in here that that is important, or whatever is happening. We want an emotional response, because if we don't get that, people don't remember and they don't care. So, basically, those stories create like emotional investment. They create stakes. It's not just system compromised, but it's the CFO on the phone with an angry board.
Something you can relate to and may affect you a little more personally. So.
Yeah. And also, it provides context, because instead of just being technical concept, it actually becomes like it becomes real through this narrative context, where when the incident master adapts a story based on player choices, and that maintains the tension. And the magic moment when players say, I need to, so meaning they're in the role instead of we should. That is where the real learning happens, and players stop being observers; they become participants in whatever events happening. But enough chitter chatter. Let's get down to business.
Yeah. So, I guess a little backstory on this. I had an acquaintance who started HackBack Gaming, and he had some CISO friends that they were playing with, and his CISO friends got busy, and he needed some people to do some games, some game-based, or we used the term gamified often at the time, tabletop exercises. Some of these were like actual incident response training. Some of them were for like sales and marketing events. And it came at me like, who knows something about Dungeons and Dragons and has some incident response experience? So this question came to me, and I'm like, yes, please. And so I did, and he did, and we did, and that kind of started HackBack Gaming. And the idea is, bringing this role-playing experience to an incident response scenario, to a tabletop exercise, in a way that's fun, in a way that's relatable, kind of just what we're talking about here.
So we have a website and a maybe not so fancy logo. We're also on LinkedIn, and you can scan the QR code if you want to.
Also not malicious, we promise.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, HackBack.
Yeah, go ahead and hit the. This we've come to think about as more of a general framework that we can apply to a lot of things. We just happen to start with incident response, but there are maybe some other applications for it too. You can really simulate any kind of situation that you can imagine with this. So HackBack is more a structure. It's more you have a few rounds, you have actions per round, you have characters, you have the things that you're trying to do, and some rules around that. You have D20s, you have dice that you can roll, and objectives you're trying to hit with them. So.
Yep. And also it's open source at some point soon.
If you want access, we will give you access. You just talk to us.
Yeah.
So it's open source-ish, soon-ish.
Yeah, but we're getting there. But let's talk a little bit about what it can be used for. Because as Glen said, incident response is an obvious way to start, because everyone needs to do incident response, right? So, all right.
Yeah. So, go ahead and hit the de-abstractify. I think that's a horrible term, a horrible word, but the idea is that we can make abstract concepts less abstract. Think, what does the term zero trust mean to people out here? What does IAM mean to people? What are some of these things that may be a little bit squishier than we'd like? I think this is a way that we can make those less squishy, more concrete, more relatable, more understandable. And sometimes you can do that just by like backing your way into it. Here, you played this game. Oh, by the way, this is what zero trust is.
And also IAM is really, really boring, but also really important. So just to get people to understand why IAM is not AD, it's also quite a challenge.
Teaching non-technical folks. There is, I think maybe my favorite application for this is when you combine technical and non-technical teams. You can bring these folks together and run a game in such a way that the technical details don't necessarily matter. It's the concepts, it's the example we used with the communications manager. I think swapping the IT manager with the communications manager, for example, and letting them experience each other's roles, you're going to get some knowledge that way and approach that you're just never going to see in your day job, right? This is an opportunity for like sales and marketing folks, maybe people that are customer facing and just need a better understanding of what some of these terms are, what they mean, how they actually play out in a practical situation.
Yeah, I suppose it's a good way to teach them how a hacker thinks, or the inside of an incident, or even showing them how their product works.
Yes. Teamwork. This is a good training opportunity and team building opportunity. When everybody's having a good time, you become closer naturally. But you also learn more about roles and responsibilities, about the thing that the scenario you're trying to play through. You learn more about each other's strengths and weaknesses, and remarkably so when you're in a little bit different role than you normally have. That gives you an opportunity to see what people can do outside of their normal role, so that maybe there's room for expansion of their skill set or their role or responsibility. Maybe they have more capability than we actually gave anybody a chance to see, and this can do that.
Yeah, and also in terms of teamwork, imagine this scenario that's a heist for 5 people, and each characters in the game are good at different things. They also bring 2 different things to the heist. So a good thing about that is it's a heist. What does that have to do with anything? Well, if they don't collaborate as one big team, they are going to win. So that's
and you can
obviously
think about that from
how
the
it works.
offensive security side too. So
Yeah, no one can win like that alone.
I think I mentioned sales and marketing events here, but the idea that you can showcase your a scenario that illustrates your product, your service, the thing that you're trying to ultimately sell. What better way to get a potential customer in a good frame of mind than to come and have a good time with this, learn something, and oh, by the way, here's what our product does. Here's where it can be embedded in a real-ish situation.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to this as a sort of virtual puck, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and also in terms of like bigger team events, because the problem with Dungeons & Dragons is that the scale is really horrible. But I've played it with 25 or 30 people, where I put people into teams, and then they play as that team instead. And yeah.
More opportunity for engagement.
Yeah, so either they can play roles, teams can play roles, or they can be divided in an attack and defense game. Yep. Oh, sorry, and into an attack and defense team. Sorry. And also you can use it to simulate real events. For instance, if you are CERT, or you do some, or you handle a really crazy incident that you may write a report about, but does that really show how you experienced that case and how you really worked? Well, why not make a game around it so people understand it?
Insert anything that may have happened here that you want to play with, and maybe you change it up a little bit, or maybe not. Maybe you play out the scenario that happened, even if you kind of know where it's going. Being in the moment with it, you might you might get a chance to think about decisions made differently.
Yeah. So, well, these are just examples that we could dream up. So, basically, as we see, this is truly the universal power tool that you really didn't know you needed, and these are just examples, and it's just about finding the right idea. It's the possibilities are literally limitless. Okay, so let's go beyond incident response. Obviously, you would use it as classic defensive response to an ongoing attack, but you can also use it for offensive security with red team operation, penetration, testing scenarios, or defensive security in the sense that proactive security work, building defenses, threat hunting, or you can build attack and defense scenarios. Why not have two teams playing against each other, where one is the attacker and one is the defender, and doing that in real time, where the attacker is the AVT group that is trying to plan the ransomware, and they both have to do stakeholder management, obviously. Hybrid scenarios where it's sort of
near and dear to us.
Yeah, because the whole thing with, for instance, a concept like risk management is that it's oftentimes really, really boring.
Speaking of those abstract things,
it doesn't really have any big geek appeal. But what if you create a scenario that happens in the Star Wars universe, where you are risk assessing the Death Star or the next generation of the Death Star, and one of you can play Darth Vader? Wouldn't that be a fun game? But actually, we are manipulating you to learn about risk management, but you don't know.
That's what I was getting at when I said you can back your way into concepts. Oh, by the way, you just learned about risk management. That's what this is.
So yeah, imagination is the only limit, and an example of that is a game called Malware and Monsters. We did for DEF CON in collaboration with the Malware Village. The founder of the Malware Village is a Japanese woman called Lina Yu. She made what you call Mole Monster. Basically, it's short for Malware Monsters, and it's basically Pokemon that represent malware. And she reached out to me to ask if we wanted to do a game around that and do a workshop at DEF CON, and we said, yeah, sure, why not? So
we operate that way.
Yeah. So basically, it's a game of around real malware families. It's creature collecting mechanics also called Pokemon, but I can't say that. So it's a Dungeons and Dragons Pokemon hybrid kind of game, where you teach actual IR skills, you hunt threat, you build teams, and basically mastering incident response through gameplay. So where cybersecurity meets adventure, you could say.
And some opportunity to put yourself in legacy situations too, with Code Red or something like that, and that turned into how our DEF CON workshop played out.
Yeah, so basically Malware and Monsters is a game on both, that's both teaching you to handle, contain malware, but it's also teaching you about malware history, because as Glen said, Code Red is really not that interesting to play in a modern IT environment, but you could go back in time and play it there without the SOC, without a CM, and then see how you would do that.
And it was fun having some older folks in the environment too, who lived and bled through various iterations of Windows NT, for example. So.
Yeah, and it's available for free at moments.world/games. Right, this is HackBack IR edition. That's the most mature version, and where everything started.
So the term Dungeon Master is often used in Dungeons and Dragons, but we are using the term Incident Master here. This person is the authority and the facilitator, the person who puts the guardrails in place and keeps the scenario moving in the direction it should, while still allowing the players to go in some crazy directions and have a good time. So.
Yeah, and also do the storytelling to help people engage and immerse.
Tell the story, yep. We typically like to have a team with broad skills, different skill sets to bring to the table to teach other people about their skills. So we were talking about flipping roles a little bit. This can work with technical teams, this can work with non-technical teams, this can work with a hybrid of both. it's fun to have your attorney or general counsel in on these things. They have a different skill set than your IT manager or your forensics person.
Yeah, but that all depends. Which roles depend on the scenario, because obviously you don't want a scenario with legal counsel where they don't have anything to do.
Yep. So your objective, the objective of your scenario is kind of what drives a lot of this. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So each player plays a character, and when the character wants to do something, you roll a die. You roll a d20, because the d20 simulates this randomness of reality. Because sometimes you do all the right things in an instant, but it just doesn't work.
Yes, I carry a d20
and obviously
in my pocket.
that's life. Oh yeah. And also we play with to make it more realistic. It's very open-ended scenarios, because they start out with just something, an incident happening, and you need to react on that. You need to go through the entire phase of finding out what happened and reacting to it.
And you don't always know what direction your players are going to take something too. There are some things where they'll pick up things that you want them to pick up, and others where you're like, well, I didn't really think you'd go down that path, but here we are. So you have to be able to adapt and work on the fly a little bit.
Yeah, well, obviously they also set some requirements or some demands for the incident master. They need to understand the technical thing, because else they can't create that valuable context around it.
It helps having bled through some incidents and prepared for incident response plan, things like that.
Well, obviously, open-ended scenario also means that technically players could run naked through the server room. Well, it doesn't do anything, but they could.
Maybe not the best idea. Then you can introduce police, for example, and
yeah, then all of a sudden it turns to a completely different scenario. But hey, that's life.
That's what
right?
they want.
Yeah. So yep.
We have characters. We're playing characters in this case. One of the things that we find is important is to get a person out of their own role, their own character. Let them play something that's a little bit different. Even if their role is fairly similar, they're playing a character. Characters have modifiers. We like to have a little bit of fun with this, where one character might have a +2 at software, but not be the most likable person. So their likability is -2. You don't necessarily send them out to the CEO to have a good one-on-one, but fixing hardware and software problems, maybe they're the right person.
And obviously, the modifiers illustrates the thing that you're good at or not good at, just like in real Dungeons and Dragons. And as Glen said, we like to make characters. We like to make them very stereotypical, and the reason for that is
maybe even overly stereotypical.
There are a couple of reasons. One of them is that they're relatable, and my favorite example is the Microsoft system architect, who is a cute Windows zealot, wants Windows in everything. They hate Linux, and truly believe that the only reason why the Lumia phone failed was because it was ahead of its time. That person also has -2 in likability, by the way. So, and we've all met persons like that at some point in our life.
These little things, these little traits that we like to exaggerate a little bit, those are the things that when a person is first getting into their character, those are the things they latch onto and really start to have immediate fun with, and that is what gets the snowball the rest of the game going.
Yeah, and at the beginning of the game, they always introduce themselves as a character, and when they introduce like someone like that, or it can even be stupid things, as a game we did once where a guy plays a woman and makes a squeaky voice. Stupid but fun, and the fun when the fun starts, that is where the magic happens. That is when people start to immerse, they start to forget, and they start to have fun, and that's what we want.
Immediately it's infectious and snowballs into everybody having a good time.
It really doesn't matter how stupid it is, just as long as they laugh, and they'll always fight something. If nothing else, just because it's awkward, but that works too. Yeah, and that helps them getting into character.
Getting into character, yeah.
And it can be a little bit challenging depending on their backgrounds. But there are many ways to play it. You don't have to immerse fully, but you can, of course. And sometimes you just, even though a person doesn't have any D&D experience, you still often every now and then meet people that jumps into the character right away, and when that happens, it's a joy, really. So yeah.
Go ahead and hit the.
Yep. So obviously, we'll.
If I can interject, you had cards with like 2 pieces of information or 1 piece of information. It looks kind of like a tournament game where you've got pre-rolled characters. How much background or exaggerated humorous aspects do you put into each of those roles? You know, like a paragraph, a page.
Usually just a couple of things.
So the question is how much background does each character get before we get them played?
Yeah, usually just a couple of things. They'll latch onto those first few points, and they can then take it any direction they want and have fun with it, invent their own points. They really start to get into a character pretty quickly with just a couple of pieces. So.
Yeah, so obviously, to show you how it works, we are going to play for a couple of minutes as one big team, just to show you how it works. So yes, your company has its entire IT infrastructure in MS Azure, and it's 4:15. Sorry, I didn't convert it to 12. Our system. That means 4:50 p.m.
So.
Just in case you didn't know.
We all know.
Yeah.
That's when incidents happen,
Yes.
right?
And Friday afternoon, incident always happens there. And you get an alert from Microsoft Dart, or whatever it's called this week, saying that your administrator for marketing, they logged in. And that's not the weird part. The weird part is that they're actually on vacation. So
Your administrator for marketing.
So the question is, what do you do? Right? Obviously, we take a number of different paths here.
What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do?
Some ideas?
Block the account, revoke session tokens.
So block the account?
Block the account? Revoke session tokens?
Yeah, but do you know if it's a false alarm?
That's step 1, and then you verify after.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Log them out and then
Crush
and then,
now,
then
verify
we'll see.
later? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's
There we go,
another,
yeah.
and that's actually a good point to annoy the person on vacation, because how do you think if you make the Microsoft system architect from before call, that
don't think
the
that
chance
one's
of them
gonna go
picking up
that
is really
well.
big? No. Well, why don't we make the first level supporter who has a +2 likability, who everyone loves, call instead? So that's another thing. Yes.
Check the logs and see if they're logging in from where their vacation is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
But
See if they're logging in from-
luckily this person is on Instagram a lot, and they print photos of them, or they post photos of themselves having a good time with their drinks in Bali, and the logins are from China. So how does that work? Yes. Yeah, log the account and make the manager deal. Yeah, exactly. Log, no questions asked, and if if it was a false alarm, so be it, right? They know who we are. Yes. But basically the point is that you can see there are many ways, many paths to go, and not that anyone is better than the other, but we can take a technical path, or we can take the human path, or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but you just need to figure out, is this a false alarm or not? So obviously that's how it's going to work. So when we find out what to do, we roll dice, see if when we call them up, are
Is
they
that
going to pick
+2
up the phone or not?
likability going to be enough?
And also if you do pick up, are they drunk, or what's the case here?
Which is where the incident master comes in and can have a good time with it too.
Yeah. So obviously depending on how that go, the incident master continues the storyline based on what happens, and then the next player takes turn, and yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, but it's also inspire a little bit to do more things with HackBack, and you can add an extra layer to purple team exercises. You can also do the risks. That's our thing we talked about before, and you can also have 2 teams playing the same scenario. One is the attacker, one is the defender, or they can work together on the same incident.
You have 2 separate teams that don't normally do a whole lot of interacting that now suddenly need to.
So
If your objective is to get those teams to work together, it's pretty easy to craft a scenario that will work for the 2.
Yeah, or you can make scenarios based on off of Mr. Robot or Brave New World or 1984 or whatever, right? Yes. All right. What else? So yes. So everything, as I said before, it's in a private GitHub repo for now, and hopefully, yes, there we are. No. All right, and we'll open source it when it's more usable. The whole point is that we want it to be easy to use before we open it generally.
We've thought of a lot of things, but there's opportunity for everybody here to innovate on this too. So.
Yeah, and it's written in Quarto Markdown, most of it. Quarto is basically Markdown, but orchestrated so that everything is written in Markdown, but you decide via YAML files what the output format is, so that it could be PDF or websites or HTML or whatever. And Malware and Monsters is also created completely in Quarto, and one thing is the website, one thing is a self-contained HTML, one thing is a presentation, and one thing is PDF. It's all Markdown. And we have a Discord server, discord.gg/hackback.
Honestly, we could use some help with some engagement there.
Yeah, exactly.
Please.
A lot of people enough, but not really much happening yet.
I'm guilty. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but sharing is caring, and also that's also completely legit QR code, and you can see from the Discord logo.
Yes, you can see how legit it is. Yes, sir.
Yep. And the question is, do we have any pre-built scenario?
Are they polished?
We have a few. Yeah, that's also one of the things we want to work on. Right now, there's a couple.
Yeah.
For instance, this ransomware scenario we just started before is there. Yes.
Yeah, the question is, do we have some scenarios that are kind of more fantasy in nature or have some of those elements in it? Not yet, but there's opportunity.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Is there a certain system you guys took inspiration from for like guidelines on the mechanics?
Where do we get our inspiration? Because obviously Dungeons and Dragons is 50 years old and hugely complex. And we want simplicity because we want people that hasn't tried Dungeons and Dragons to be able to know what it's all about.
Pick it up really easily. So we've got a very simplified rule structure, and do we have more on that later in the deck? I don't know. Maybe not.
But basically, we had plans about what the state of HackBack is. Turns out we really hate to write documentation, but then AI came by, so they will be improved shortly. But what we do have is pre-made characters, 3 scenarios plus some IM guidance plus handouts, and rules are somewhat documented. We also did a workshop at Visa Las Vegas this year, and there's a workbook for that workshop in there as well. Rules and the IM handbook. And it's almost ready for use. And
if you have a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons experience, it'll be pretty easy to pick this up.
Yeah.
But if you don't, it could be more polished. So.
Yeah. So, but I said we started filling the gaps with my new best friend Claude Code, and so we'll see. There's a long list of things to collaborate on, and that's all documented issues in the GitHub. Not yet, but it's one of the ideas we have.
Yeah, I think we've gotten to where we're using AI pretty heavily to help create scenarios, to create artifacts, to make it more interesting, more believable, but we haven't gotten to the point where we've kind of turned that over to AI in some sort of live way. So.
Yeah, and then for the next slide will be a little bit European. So if you're doing NIS2 is compliance stuff. So if you're doing that or any other kind of compliance where incident response training is required, why not make it fun and engaging so that your colleagues don't hate you? Like 2 birds with 1 stone. Yes.
A lot of things have the de facto tabletop exercise requirement to test your incident response. So.
But remember to have fun and learn, because obviously this is the core message of the whole presentation. That learning through engagement and fun is not unserious and should not be looked down upon. It's effective. And we are looking forward to receiving your pull requests. Yes.
Hint, hint.
Yes, exactly. And also, one more thing, you should, before we go, and except of course showing up this really, really cool.
Oh, that was
yeah,
neat.
exactly.
That was super.
But
neat.
if you're ready to try this out, we'll be happy to help you out. We also, if you're a manager and can do this on your own with your own budget, that's really cool. But if not, we also know how to convince managers. So that's even more awesome. But yeah, I guess the last thing is to say thanks. And if you have any any more questions, and if you scan the QR code, you will most definitely download the slides.
Questions, comments,
And if you have any questions
issues,
after this, we'll be around. Or you can send us an email or whatever you want to.
Surely
And also if you want to play, if you don't have anything going on tonight, we could play Mill and Monsters or whatever. We just need somewhere to do it because there aren't that many locations on Deadwood that's not filled already.
All right.
Yep. All right.
So feel free to talk to us on and around the venue about any of this. So, thank you.
All right. That's it.